Hello there, my friend. Take a moment to set down the weight of your day. Whatever burdens followed you here, let them rest for now. Tonight, you and I will step into a world both ancient and familiar, where the sea whispers stories and the night carries secrets untold. You've heard the tale of Odysseus, the wandering hero of Troy, who faced monsters, storms, and the wrath of gods. But rarely do we pause to wonder about the one who stayed behind, the woman who waited, who endured, who held a kingdom together in silence. This is not the story of Odysseus, but of Penelope, the faithful queen of Ithaca, who spent 20 long years weaving and unweaving her days in hope, in fear, and in love. So settle in, breathe softly, and let me take you back to Ithaca, where the waves kissed the shore and one woman's patience became as legendary as any hero's sword. The nights on Ithaca were never truly quiet. Even when the wind was gentle and the waves only lapped softly against the shore, there was always the hush of waiting, a sound Penelope had learned to recognize. She stood often by the tall windows of her chamber, looking out toward the horizon, where the sea stretched endless and merciless. Somewhere beyond that darkness, she told herself, Odysseus was alive. But 20 years is a long time to tell yourself the same story. At first, there were letters of rumor carried by passing sailors, stories of battles won, islands discovered, and gods who tested mortal pride. Penelope listened eagerly, her heart leaping at every mention of Odysseus. But as the years folded one into another, the news grew faint, like a voice calling from too far away to truly hear. She was not just a wife waiting, she was a queen. The kingdom of Ithaca looked to her for guidance, for strength, for reassurance that their king had not abandoned them. And so she wore her calm face like armor. She welcomed her people with kind words. She managed the affairs of the palace. She even smiled at times. But every night, when the torches dimmed and her ladies slept, she sat by her loom. It was at the loom that Penelope found her rhythm. Weaving was her companion, her solace, her way of bending time. Each thread she pulled across was a memory of Odysseus, the warmth of his hand, the sound of his laughter, the sharp spark in his eyes when he spoke of cunning plans. And when the moon reached its highest place in the sky, she would undo her day's work, pulling the threads loose in silence. For this was her secret, her clever delay against the suitors who crowded her halls, each one demanding her hand in marriage. They saw a widow, she saw a test. And every night she whispered into the dark, I will not give you up, not until the sea itself tells me he is gone. Yet sometimes when the wind shifted, bringing with it the salt of distant storms, even Penelope wondered how long she could keep waiting. And on one such night, as the suitors' laughter echoed through her halls, Penelope realized her battle was only just beginning.
The suitors had grown bold. At first, they lingered politely in the great hall, speaking with the careful manners of men who claimed respect for their queen. They brought gifts, golden goblets, embroidered robes, fine oils from far-off lands. But gifts, Penelope knew, were not given freely. They were promises wrapped in silk, chains disguised as treasures. By the 10th year of Odysseus's absence, their patience wore thin. The once respectful visitors became intruders who treated the palace as if it were already theirs. They feasted on Ithaca's wine, slaughtered its livestock, filled the halls with loud laughter and careless songs. Their presence was a constant wound, a reminder of what Penelope was expected to surrender. She met them with grace, always grace, her voice steady, her smile faint, her posture queenly. But behind her calm eyes a storm raged. They spoke of Odysseus as though he were already dead, as though she were too fragile, too naive to accept the truth. They called themselves protectors of Ithaca. She saw them for what they were, men hungry for power, circling like wolves at dusk. Her only weapon was time, and so she wove. She told them she would choose a new husband once her great tapestry was finished, a shroud for Laertes, Odysseus's father, who lived still but aged quickly. They agreed, seeing her weaving as a symbol of finality. But they did not know the truth of her nights when she unraveled her work thread by thread, defying their expectations, buying herself another dawn. Yet even the strongest patience carries a shadow of doubt. Sometimes when she unpicked the threads in the torchlight, her hands trembling from fatigue, Penelope wondered if she was weaving not for her father-in-law, not for her people, but for herself. Was she building a web of hope, only to hide her fear? And then came whispers, rumors that Odysseus had been seen on distant shores, other whispers that he had been swallowed by the sea. Each word cut her differently, leaving her both burning with hope and aching with despair. Still she endured, for endurance had become her throne. But endurance has enemies. One suitor in particular, a man named Antinous, had begun to watch her more closely. He was sharp, impatient, and ruthless. Unlike the others, he did not hide behind charm. He saw through her delaying games, and one evening, as the torches flickered low, Penelope caught his eyes fixed on her loom, as if he already knew her secret. And in that moment, she understood her clever game of weaving and unweaving could not last forever.
The suitors had grown bold. The hall of Ithaca grew heavier with each passing day. What was once the heart of her kingdom now echoed with the voices of men who did not belong. Penelope walked among them with quiet dignity, though inside her spirit tightened like a bowstring drawn too far. Antinous was the loudest voice. His laughter cut through the air like a blade, sharp and arrogant. Unlike the other suitors who cloaked their ambitions with soft words, Antinous reveled in his power. He mocked the absent king, calling Odysseus a ghost who clung to the memory of a woman too proud to let go. Penelope never answered his taunts.
She held her silence the way Odysseus once held a sword, with deadly control. But she knew silence alone could not shield her forever. Already whispers spread among the servants. Fear lingered in their eyes as they served wine to the uninvited guests. Some wondered if their queen would be forced to choose a new husband. Some even hoped she would, weary of the chaos filling the halls. At night, Penelope sat at her loom, weaving as always. The torchlight flickered against her hands, steady, yet trembling beneath her calm. She had grown so used to undoing her work in the shadows that it felt almost like a ritual, a secret prayer she repeated night after night. Yet one evening, as she pulled the threads loose, a sound broke the silence. It was Antinous' voice. "I knew it," he said softly, his words thick with triumph. He stood in the doorway, watching her hands unravel the tapestry she had promised would end their waiting. His smile was cruel, sharp as a knife. "You have till dawn. This ends soon, my queen. Choose, or we will choose for you." Her hands clenched around the fabric. She had survived 20 years of silence, 20 years of waiting, 20 years of hope. But now the battle was no longer just with time. It was with the living, breathing threat that stood before her. And as Antinous' shadow loomed across her loom, Penelope knew the war for her home had begun. The next morning, the palace felt different. Antinous had not spoken of what he saw the night before, but Penelope could feel the shift in the air. The suitors moved with a new kind of confidence, as though they sensed victory drawing closer. Their laughter rang louder, their demands sharper. And though no words were spoken outright, Penelope knew Antinous was waiting, savoring the moment he would force her hand. She carried herself as always, calm and regal, but her thoughts churned like storm-tossed waves. For years she had relied on her weaving, her clever secret, to delay the inevitable. Now, with her trick discovered, she needed something more. That night, as the torches burned low, she sat alone in the great hall. The loom stood unfinished, its threads dangling like broken promises. She rested her hands upon it, as though it were both her weapon and her shield. "Odysseus," she whispered into the silence, "if you still live, I need you more than ever." But no answer came, only the distant crash of waves against Ithaca's rocky shore. It was then Penelope made her choice, not to surrender, but to fight in her own way. She would give the suitors a challenge so steep, so impossible, that none could claim her hand unless fate itself willed it. The idea came to her like a spark in the dark. The great bow of Odysseus still rested in the palace, a weapon no man but his master had ever bent. Its string was stiff, its curve unyielding. Many had tried, and all had failed. If the suitors believed themselves worthy of a queen, let them prove it, not with words, not with gifts, but with strength and skill. The next day, she spoke her plan aloud before them. "You wish for me to choose? Then here is the trial. Whosoever can string the great bow of Odysseus and send an arrow clean through 12 axe heads shall be my husband." A hush fell over the hall. Some suitors smirked in arrogance,
Others frowned, remembering past attempts, but Antinous smiled, cold and confident, as though this challenge was merely another step toward his triumph. Penelope, however, felt her heart steady for the first time in years. She had placed her fate in the hands of a test only one man had ever passed. And as she walked away, she wondered, if Odysseus still lived, could destiny guide him back in time for this final trial?
The bow of Odysseus was brought into the hall with great ceremony. Its polished wood gleamed in the torchlight, the curve of it both beautiful and menacing. It had rested untouched for years, a relic of a king who might never return. Now it would serve as the measure of men who claimed to deserve his throne. The suitors gathered eagerly, their voices loud, their confidence unshaken. One after another they boasted of their strength, their skill with weapons, their worthiness to rule. Penelope sat at the high seat, her face calm, though inside her heart beat with quiet hope. For she knew the truth. This bow was not meant for ordinary hands. The first suitor stepped forward. He gripped the bow, his muscles straining as he tried to bend it. The string would not move. His face reddened, his breath came harsh, until at last he dropped it with a curse, his pride wounded. Laughter filled the hall. Another tried, and another. Some nearly bent it, but none came close to stringing it. Sweat poured down their brows, frustration grew, and the bow lay unyielding, silent as stone. Antinous watched them all, his smile sharp, his eyes cold. When his turn came, he strode forward with the confidence of a man who believed the world belonged to him. He lifted the bow, his arms tense, his jaw set. For a moment it seemed he might succeed. The wood creaked, the string quivered, but no more. His strength faltered, and with a snarl he let it fall, glaring as though the bow itself had betrayed him. The hall was filled with noise, arguments, and excuses. The suitors clamored for another chance, for wine to strengthen them, for time to rest. But Penelope's gaze stayed on the bow, her heart whispering a single prayer. If you live, Odysseus, let fate guide you home to claim what is yours. That night, as the suitors drank heavily to cover their shame, a stranger lingered near the edges of the hall. Cloaked, quiet, unseen by most, he watched the bow with eyes that seemed too familiar. And Penelope, though she did not yet know it, was closer to her answer than she had ever been before. The suitors drank deep into the night, their laughter echoing through the marble halls like the roar of men who had forgotten shame. The air was thick with wine and smoke, the smell of roasted meat clinging to every corner. Penelope excused herself quietly, retreating to her chamber, but her mind was far from rest. She thought of the bow, unyielding, untamed, and of the challenge she had set before them. None had succeeded, yet their arrogance had not faltered. They would try again tomorrow and the next day until her walls crumbled under their demands. Still, in the back of her mind, a whisper stirred.
the memory of a stranger's eyes glinting in the firelight, watching, waiting. The man had come days before, cloaked as a beggar, his face shadowed with age and travel. To the suitors he was nothing, just another vagrant seeking bread and warmth. They mocked him, tossed scraps his way, and forgot him as quickly as they noticed him. But Penelope, with the instinct of one who had waited too long, felt something different in him. There was a stillness, a quiet strength that set him apart. That evening she summoned him softly. "Stranger," she said, her voice steady though her heart quickened, "you have watched much and spoken little. Tell me, what do you know of my husband?" The beggar bowed his head. "He have seen him," he answered, his tone low, steady as the sea. "Alive, though weary, he fights still to return." Her breath caught, though she did not let it show. Hope was a dangerous thing, and she had learned to hold it like a blade, carefully, lest it cut her too deep. She asked, "How can I believe you?" The beggar lifted his gaze, and for an instant, just an instant, she thought she saw something familiar in the curve of his smile, in the sharpness of his eyes. But then the moment was gone, replaced by the weary look of a wanderer who had seen too much. That evening Penelope lay awake long after the torches had died, her heart torn between doubt and the fragile spark of belief. And in the shadows of the hall the beggar lingered near the bow of Odysseus, as though fate itself had guided him to the heart of the trial.
Morning broke over Ithaca with pale light spilling across the palace steps. The suitors stirred from their feasting, their laughter now hoarse, their pride still bruised by the bow they could not bend. Yet none spoke of surrender. Each believed another day, another try would prove his worth. The great bow rested in the hall like a silent judge. Its polished wood gleamed, unyielding, as if waiting for hands worthy enough to touch it. Penelope moved through the hall, her face as calm as stone, though her thoughts were restless. She glanced once at the stranger, the beggar who lingered at the edges, ignored and mocked by all. Something about him unsettled her, like a half-remembered dream. As the day wore on, the suitors tested their strength again. One by one, they grunted, strained, cursed, and failed. The bow refused them all. Antigonus, red with fury, spat bitter words, accusing Penelope of trickery, of making fools of them. But she answered only with her serene silence, her eyes drifting to the stranger as if guided by fate. It was then the beggar stepped forward. His voice was quiet but steady, carrying across the noisy hall. He said, "Let me try." The suitors burst into laughter, some choking on their wine. "You?" Antigonus sneered. "A ragged wanderer dares to challenge kings?" "Let him," another jeered. "We'll see him break his back before he bends that bow." But Telemachus, her son, who had grown into a young man in the shadow of his father's absence, spoke with unexpected fire. Why should he not? A guest in this hall deserves the chance to prove himself as much as any of you. The room fell into uneasy silence. The beggar stepped closer to the bow, his movements unhurried, his hands steady. Penelope's breath caught as she watched him lay his fingers upon the wood with a familiarity that seemed almost intimate. The suitors mocked louder, but the sound seemed distant to her ears. For in the way the beggar lifted the bow, she felt a memory stirring. The image of another man long ago, stringing the same weapon with effortless grace. And in that moment, as the beggar's hands closed around the bow, Penelope knew the truth was about to reveal itself. The whole grew hushed as the beggar lifted the great bow of Odysseus. The suitors leaned forward, their faces twisted with scorn, eager to witness his failure. Antinous smirked, certain that the ragged man would soon make a fool of himself before them all. But the beggar's hands did not tremble. With the ease of one who had known the bow all his life, he examined its curve, tested its weight, and ran his fingers across the string as if greeting an old friend long forgotten. The suitors jeered louder. "He toys with it," one shouted. "He delays the inevitable," another sneered. But Penelope said nothing. Her heart pounded, her gaze fixed on him. Telemachus stood close by, his jaw tight, his eyes glimmering with something more than curiosity. Then, in one swift motion, the beggar bent the bow. The wood creaked, the strings sang, and in the space of a heartbeat the impossible was done. The bow was strung. Silence fell. The laughter died on the lips of the suitors. Shock spread across their faces, as if the world itself had betrayed them. Penelope's breath caught. She gripped the arm of her chair, her pulse racing. No man but one had ever strung that bow. The beggar reached for an arrow. With calm precision, he set it upon the string and drew it back. His shoulders straightened, his eyes sharpened, and for the first time the mask of age and weariness seemed to fall away. The arrow flew. It whistled through the air, cutting cleanly through the line of 12 axe heads that had been set as the trial. It struck true, quivering at its mark, as though the gods themselves had guided it. A stunned silence filled the hall. The suitors stared, unable to speak. Telemachus's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, as if a truth long buried had just stepped into the light. Penelope's eyes met the stranger's, and in them she no longer saw a beggar. She saw the cunning spark, the unyielding will, the familiar fire she had not seen in 20 years. And though no words were spoken yet, her heart whispered the name she had waited half a lifetime to hear. Odysseus.
The hall trembled with silence. The suitors, who once filled it with laughter and arrogance, now sat frozen as if the very ground had betrayed them. None dared speak. None dared move. All eyes turned toward the man who had strung the bow, the stranger who had undone years of their pride in a single breath. Penelope rose slowly from her seat. Her heart pounded so fiercely it felt as though it might break free of her chest.
20 years of waiting, weaving, unraveling, of holding hope like a fragile ember, and now before her stood a man cloaked in rags, holding the bow of Odysseus as if it had never left his hands. Her lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to run to him, to cry out his name, to throw her arms around him, but doubt crept in like a shadow. What if this was a trick of the gods? What if longing had painted her vision false? She had dreamed of his return so often that she feared her mind might be conjuring him now. One final cruel jest. The beggar, no, the man, looked at her, and in his gaze was something only she could recognize. A spark of wit, a stubborn fire, a depth carved by both love and pain. Her breath caught. Could any trickster imitate that? Telemachus stepped forward, his young voice firm, almost trembling. "Mother," he said, his eyes fixed on her, "this is no beggar. This is my father." But Penelope did not rush to embrace him. She had lived too long in uncertainty to yield so easily. She steadied her voice and said softly, "If you are truly Odysseus, then prove it, not with words, not with bows, but with the truth of our home. Tell me something no other soul could know." The beggar, no, the man, looked at her, and faint smile touched his lips. "Our bed," he said, his voice low and sure, "cannot be moved, for I built it around the trunk of a living olive tree, its roots deep in the earth of our chamber. Only you and I have shared that secret." Her breath shuddered. The world seemed to fall away, for only Odysseus could speak those words. Only he would remember the bed carved from a living tree, their bed, their bond, their secret. Her doubts crumbled like sand in the tide. Tears filled her eyes, her strength wavering after so many years of holding steady. And in that instant she knew. Odysseus had returned. The hall was no longer filled with shadows of doubt. It was filled with the sound of a woman's sob, quiet at first, then breaking like a storm that had waited 20 years to fall. Penelope rushed forward, her hands trembling, her eyes searching every line of his face as though she feared he might vanish if she blinked. "Odysseus," she whispered, the name catching on her lips like a prayer at last answered. She reached for him, and he caught her in his arms, the bow slipping to the ground, forgotten. He held her close, burying his face in her hair, and in that embrace time folded back upon itself. They were not two figures weathered by years of hardship and longing. They were simply the young man and woman who had once promised each other a life, a home, a future. For a moment, silence stretched, save for the beating of their hearts against one another. The suitors, the doubts, the years of loneliness, none of it mattered any more. What remained was the bond that neither war, nor distance, nor the cruelty of time could undo. Telemachus, watching from the side, felt a warmth rise in his chest. His family, broken for so long, was whole again. Penelope pulled back just enough to look into her husband's eyes. "You came home," she said, her voice filled with awe. "All these years I held on to a thread of hope, and tonight it has become a tapestry." Odysseus smiled, weary but unwavering. "And I held on to you," he answered. "Through storms, through monsters, through endless nights at sea, I carried your memory as my compass." The night air drifted through the broken hall, carrying with it the scent of olive wood and the faint promise of peace. For the first time in 2 decades, Penelope felt her heart rest. The waiting was over. And so the tale of Odysseus and Penelope closes not on the roar of battles or the cunning of heroes, but on the quiet truth that love, patient, steadfast love, can outlast even the longest journey. And there, dear dreamer, our tale comes to its gentle end. Penelope's patience, her quiet strength, and her faith in love remind us that sometimes the greatest adventures are not in faraway seas, but in the steadfastness of the heart. Now let your own thoughts grow still, as if carried by calm waters under a starry night. Drift gently into rest, knowing that like Penelope, you too can find peace after long waiting. Good night, sweet dreamer. May your sleep be deep, and may your heart be light.